All right, so Rick, we're going to talk about liability now. Is that right? And how to limit it.
I think before you do anything besides decide that you want to be a real estate investor, you need to cover that topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how have you, in your career so far, managed to limit your liability?
It's a combination of things, but for me, it started with what the industry calls an SPE.
Okay, what's that?
That's a special purpose entity.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about what types of SPEs I've used and what I would recommend for you guys. But I did not want to buy a duplex or a fourplex or an 8-unit in my personal name. Even though I was 25, I knew enough. I'd heard enough horror stories to know. I'd seen the movie. Well, that's not true because that was like 1989. And my first two, Pacific Heights is. If y'all haven't watched that movie,
right?
Watch
you
it.
keep telling us about it.
You told us about
it's
a few
like
things from it.
Opportunistic, bad scam tenant was trying to buy a building for cheap, a rental building for cheap, by driving out the tenants and driving down the value with a bunch of manipulation and letting rats go and bugs and stuff. But so I knew that I was not going to buy something personally because I wanted to separate the business assets from my personal assets. In other words, I didn't want, I didn't expect to be sued, but I didn't want to be sued. It's a litigious world that we live in, and you can't turn the TV on without some ambulance chaser saying, if you've ever had a headache and you lived in Rick's apartment, sue Rick. Call me, though. Call me. And I hate those guys. I hate to say it. Some of them are my personal friends, but I hate what they do. They're parasites. I hate the insurance companies. They put me as a small business owner in the middle of those two things. And the insurance companies, they gouge me every year, and they justify it by saying, we got all these idiots that are out here on the TV, getting people to think that if they had a stomach ache, then it's worth $1 million and, they should sue. So I decided that I was going to write a contract with what they call an assignment provision. So I didn't want to go out and spend $1,000 or $500 to set up an SPE or a special purpose entity to take title to, or that's another way to say buy a rental property. Because I might set up the entity and spend that money to the attorney, and then I might not like the actual asset. I might not ever buy it. So I decided in my initial offer, I found a property that I wanted to buy, and you know the asset. And so I wrote a contract that basically said it was in my name, but I could assign it to, and the seller wanted to sell it to me. He didn't want me to be able to bring in other people or to flip the contract to somebody else. People do that all the time. As a matter of fact, we need to talk about that before this episode's over. There's a scam going on that y'all need to be aware of.
Okay.
Oh.
And but anyway, so I wrote the contract. Rick Hansen was defined as the buyer, and I had a provision in the contract that said I could assign it to an entity that I owned or controlled. So once I got into what we call due diligence, and we've filmed a couple of those episodes, I realized I really wanted this asset. And it had some challenges and some potential problems, but I knew I could overcome those, and I wanted to do it. At the time, there was not an option of an LLC or a limited liability corporation that was available. I think this was maybe circa late 1984, because I closed on January 15th, 1985, one of the greatest days of my life, until I got home and my wife wasn't as impressed with my accomplishments as I thought she would be. She's like, what have you done? So
an LLC wasn't a thing back then? Or
no, I don't think it was illegal, not in Alabama. So anyway, so I set up a limited partnership. It was very cumbersome and it was expensive, and they were a thing. So I set up an S Corp. This was a layered thing, and don't do any of this. There's no need to now, but because an LLC was not an option in 1985, I had to set up a limited partnership, and I had a corporate. I owned the corporation, but I had a corporation that was the general partner. So the liability into the limited partnership would theoretically stop at the limited partnership level, but if it penetrated beyond that into the general partnership, it still was not me personally. I did not want to be either the individual buyer, or I didn't want to be the general partner in a limited partnership. So I bought that property. 2 or 3 years later, the LLC came along and I converted my limited partnership. It cost me a few $1,000 in legal fees, but the tax filing every year was simplified. I got it all back in just a couple of years of not having a huge bill for my bill for my accountant was still big and still is. But anyway, so I bought the 16 units in an SPE, a special purpose entity. The next property that I bought was a fourplex. I didn't build it. I bought an existing fourplex. And it was located in Felder. I think we've driven by it. The address, I think, was 754 Felder Avenue. I don't own it, so don't go by there and, kick the tires.
We may have talked about it
I think we
on
did.
the video.
It was a great asset, too. I don't own it. I haven't owned it for a couple of decades. I don't know who owns it now. But so the only reason I'm telling you the address is the entity that I had for that particular property was 754 Felder LLC.
Interesting.
And that was a message in addition to a strategy, because if a trial lawyer got hold of, somebody said, I had a headache when I was in an apartment, B over at 754 Felder, and he sees, A, it's an LLC, and B, that it's a specific LLC just for that asset, all of a sudden, he can't get the jet and the plane. He's got to decide between one or the other, and he's like, I'm going to go on to a different client that didn't structure his assets this way. So
it's not worth it.
Now, it is worth it until, it used to be April 15th, but my filing deadline was terrible. In 2017, it went from all my corporate filings, tax filings have to be done. You got to file your 1040 by April 15th, or else you get a nasty gram from the government telling you how much you owe them for fees, and it gets worse. It only gets worse.
Oh gosh!
And so don't mess with your IRS. It doesn't end well. And but anyway, so you have to file a tax return for every one of these. So I felt like it was a smart strategy for 10 months out of the year, but in now January and February when they moved it to March 15th. And I know the reason they did it, and it's not really necessary for you guys to think about, but I was filing the returns for the corporations closer to April 15th. I had to file an extension or two over the decades, but I always try to get it done. It's like don't invite me to go hunting in January because I'm doing tax season. It's not.
And you have CPAs, but it's still
but so my first year I would take them the checkbooks. Like, hey, this is my tax year for 750 Felder, and this is it for 283 Ridge Avenue, and I got a $42,000 bill in 1987. And I'm like, so I met, and I'm still using those accountings. As a matter of fact, she's retired now, but she was a classmate of mine. She's smarter than me. And
that's how much you paid to have someone do it for you
that first year. So I met with her.
Wow. And how many individual corporations did you turn? Was it
the year I got the $42,000 bill? I had bought I might have had 30 units, so I had four or five or six entities.
Wow!
So, and I had a management company too that managed just my properties, but I had an S corp. We'll talk about that, set up for the management company, because I felt like if in the management company I didn't want to own any assets other than equipment and tools and things like that. I felt like that would probably get sued first, and I didn't want to have any assets in there to where I could say, okay, Mr. Smartass Attorney, you can have the keys to Residence Group, but you ain't going to keep 754 Felder, or you can have 754 Felder, but you're not going to get 2933 Park Avenue or whatever, So, unfortunately, I never got into that situation, and I guess, it could still happen.
And you've never been sued. That's right.
Never been sued by a tenant, I've been sued for, countersued for something. I was a builder. I was a home builder, and we put something called Drive It or EFIS on the siding, and it was a thing back then. It was a less expensive, supposedly weatherproofed, insulated, exterior veneer that was cheaper than brick or even stucco. And
that's what we looked at the Montgomery complex, right?
Is that right? It's like a concrete, but they make it look like bricks.
No, that's
something else.
hardy plank, and that's actually stucco. That's real stucco.
Okay.
That was stamped stucco that looks like brick, and then it goes on either the color of your mortar or the color of the brick that you want, and then they paint.
Kind of roll it over.
So this, what you're talking about, then is even cheaper.
Yes, yes, and so it was great. It's great. It was a real. They call it value engineering. It was a way to get the construction costs down.
So then someone sued for what reason?
So it later became, and it was mainly because of bad installs, bad installations. but it became an access point. If the stucco was not, or the drive, it was not brought up off the ground by 5 or 6 inches, moisture and bugs and stuff could get behind and get into the house.
You said you were countersued. That means you had sued someone first.
I'm in a thing right now where I've sued somebody and they've countersued me. I've sued them for non-payment of something. It has nothing to do with real estate.
Right.
But in my real estate, no, I've never been sued. None of my corporations have ever been sued.
That's good.
Fortunately, I've never had a mugging or assault or anything. I had a tree fall on somebody's car, and he threatened to sue me. He was an attorney,
Wow.
and he filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. That's the only complaint I've ever had. Look it up.
I'm sure you've been threatened by suit
all
more
the time.
than you can remember.
I get people try to push me around all the time. And the latest scam, before I forget this, this is a very real thing. There's not a day that goes by that I don't get an email or a call that. And a lot of times I don't realize the emails because they go to my spam file until I'm looking. Somebody says, you didn't respond to this, and I'm looking for something that somebody legitimate sent me that's been put into spam, and I see all these things. So, but the latest thing is I'll get a voicemail from somebody, and it's like area code 615 is like, I don't know where that is or what that is, and they're all different numbers, but they're all in area code 615, and it's somebody with a foreign accent. And I get a lot of area code 251, which is South Alabama. I think those are stolen numbers. I think those are legitimate numbers.
I get scams all the time from 334.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how
they
it
can
works.
hijack. I get a few of those, but it's the same. It's probably the same people coming from 15 or 20 different numbers. And I've actually saved one. Maybe we can get B-roll. I go, play it for you. I say, because I knew we were going to do this. But they're basically, hey, we know that you've got a property at XYZ, Norman Bridge Road, and we want to know if you'd entertain an offer. We're acquisition people, and we're very interested in your property. And there are a lot more coming at me nowadays than there used to be, and there's more scammers today, so that may be the reason for that. But it also could be that somebody realizes that entity for the red brick apartments is the same entity that it was, even though I converted the limited partnership to an LLC 2 or 3 years later after I bought it. It's still been almost 40 years since that LLC was formed, and they're like, okay, this ownership has been the same. Maybe it's time to kick the tires and see if this guy would be interested in selling.
Hi, this is Jesse Stevens, calling from the acquisitions team of Lydia Hobbs. I'm calling about the property on 1823-1869 Norman Bridge Road because we're very interested in. So if you consider an offer, I'd love to speak with you. Please give me a call back at 228-299-2687. That's my number again, 228-299-2687. Thank you, and have a good one.
So this is a theory. I couldn't figure it out why people were. I thought initially what they were trying to do is find a property, identify either an older seller or a desperate seller, and offer a below market value for that. But I don't think that's the case. What I think they're doing is they're trying to get the property under contract with a contract that they do not even anticipate closing and buying on, but using that contract as a way to go to potential investors to say, if you invest $50,000 with us, we've got this property under contract in Montgomery, Alabama, and they steal the $50,000 times 10 people or 20 people and go on to the next property, and they never buy anything that they put under contract. So that's my theory.
So is that a scam that could fall back on you, or is that only a problem for the investors?
It's a problem for me because I would be wasting my time, showing them the property, and I'm not interested in that. And this happens. I get a call like this at least 5 or 6 times a week, and maybe a month ago I got one from a Birmingham, Alabama number. So I researched the number. I just Googled the number, and it was a trucking company, and I think that was a legitimate business, but I think that somehow these scammers have hijacked the phone number of this company that was in area code 251. And they're all foreign, speaking. And
probably don't live in the country.
That's not to say that if it was an English speaker with a southern accent that talks like me, that I wouldn't have the same doubts about it. I'm just not, I'm not responding to any of these. And it's been going on for like 2 years. It's like nonstop. It's just aggravating. So, but, if you have a company that tells you that they have an asset under contract and they want you to put up your money up front, you better make sure that there's some kind of a way to get that money back. Vultures a lot of times, and they're not. I initially all these years thought they were trying to buy a property for like a song and a dance, try to find a desperate seller, in a tough economy. And the problem with that logic is, for me, my rental does best when the home business is bad. I mean, it's like, when I got out of the home business, it's like recession, all right. Because people aren't going to leave my $1,200 a month apartment to go buy a $250,000 house because they can't get financed for it. Right. And they don't want to. That's the other thing that changed. Generation X and Generation Z, they don't want to maintain a house. They want to go and go and go. And that's, boomers were conditioned to say, hey, you buy a house, and that's your retirement, and you do nothing but pay your mortgage off. And now they're offering a 50-year friggin' mortgage. What the hell? I mean, that's the worst friggin'
You're going to die and not own your house.
It's like you're in debt forever.
Yeah.
I know. And then what are your kids don't get the house?
Well, that's a whole nother podcast, but I'm convinced that there's this cabal that's out there that's trying to dumb us down and make us more dependent. And this cryptocurrency thing where they can just wipe your bank account out. I mean, Putin in Russia is doing it right now. So, and I don't want to get into the politics here. It's just I hate politicians worse than I hate trial lawyers. So, and I have trial lawyers that are my friends. I have no politicians. I hate them all. I'd flog every one of them with a rubber hose if I could. So, I hope Patel doesn't come after me for saying that. But
maybe you should be a politician.
So,
be the first good one.
Hell no. So I can't complain too much. So hell no. But anyway, so I have a big tax bill every year. That's the downside to having multiple entities. But I also have the ability to protect myself against a claim. And that's not a great, it's a good solution, but it's not the all-encompassing solution. I also have good insurance. And so when you buy a policy for your home, your homeowner's policy will have built into it some liability coverage, but there's a limit to that coverage. And I didn't realize this until I was in my late 20s after I bought my first house. And I try to read every contract that's ever been submitted to me, but to read not only the insurance policy itself, but all of the potential we'll cover you, but for this or for that. And it changes every year. It's like every year with Travelers. I've been with Travelers forever, and I've been a great client. My checks have always cashed, and I've had one claim with them, and they gave me a hard time about that one claim. It was a fire.
Of course they did.
Somebody's frying a hot dog in grease or something
That's
stupid.
Right.
So,
I remember that.
Anyway, but, they justify, these increases because of the trial lawyers, and then they give you less and less coverage. They raise your premiums.
It's like, what's the point of insurance?
We're no longer covering you for this or for that, and it's like civil unrest. I mean, so when all this stuff was happening in 2020 with, all the riots and everything, I'm like, my God, a crowd, and there was stuff on social media that, this crowd was going to come to every city and do this and do that. And I'm like, if Travelers doesn't cover me for that, I'm in trouble. If they come. Yeah. But anyway, for homeowners, it's typically, $250,000, $300,000, something like that. So that means that your maximum coverage, if you get sued for $500,000, they're going to come after, they'll take the $300,000, from the insurance company, but then the deficiency, they're going to come after you for that. And the they is the attorney that, he wants more than the boat, he wants the jet. So $500,000 is, so for me, I don't ever buy a policy for it might just be a duplex, but it's a minimum of a $1 million, $2 million. So the $2 million is general aggregate, and the $1 million is the per incident. So, and I am going to knock on wood for this. Fortunately, I got in trouble for on this film. But anyway, I have never had to use it, but I sure sleep better knowing that I have it. Now, on top of that, when I had, at the height, I had just under 300 units. I had what they call an umbrella policy, which is, it's the cheapest insurance that you can buy. Basically, it sits behind, your main liability coverage. It never goes into play unless somebody's suing you for $10 million or whatever. So if I had something that, if I caused somebody a headache because they didn't like, the noise that the dumpster was, or the truck that picks up the dumpster was making at 5 a.m. or whatever. I mean, some frivolous crap that, these attorneys are saying, hey, you know what? That's a good claim there. Let's get him for that. Because he'll settle, he'll probably rather than spend $25,000 to defend this claim, he'll settle for $15,000. It'll be the quickest, easiest money, you are going to make, and I will fight those, if I get in that thing, I'm going to fight that, I'm going to spend $100,000 in defense fees to make this guy's job as hard as it can. At the end of the day, I'm going to say, okay, here's the one key that you can have, and it's worth $50,000. So good luck to you, But at any rate, so the umbrella coverage, at the height, I think I had one that went to $20 million. And my logic was, it only matters when it matters. And it was so cheap to go from 10 million to 20 million because your main policy is ahead of it. So they're like, okay, 99.999% of the potential claims this guy's going to have are going to be covered by his underlying coverage of the 1 million, 2 million. So liability insurance is the first thing is pick a special purpose entity that will limit your liability to the entity itself. Second thing is insurance. Third thing is you got to have best practices. And so where's that form? We were kidding in an earlier podcast when we were going to go crawl under the building, and I said there's rats that'll attack you, and there's all kinds of spiders that might bite you in the nose.
You had to sign that waiver.
Yeah, and I thought I was so smart, but you just sign like an X. But anyway, so that's a part of what I'm talking about. Best practices involves a lot of things, and for me, it basically is. I'm not one of these landlords that walks my property once a year, or that I'm local.
You're always out
I
here.
live here.
Yeah.
I mean, I walk to my job. I put maybe 5,000 miles a year on my car. My wife maybe puts 8 on hers. It's like I'm right here. And so every day I'm like, oh my God, there's a big tree limb that's, so they call them widowmakers for a reason, and it's like, okay, I'm going to call the tree guy and get him out here. And I'm on the phone, like, I get into the office and I'm, Southern tree surgeon dude. Hey, dude, can you be here by this afternoon? He's like, no, I'm pretty well tied up. I'm like, man, I'm going to throw an extra 150 if you can come today. I mean, I'm that way.
Yeah.
I am that way. I don't want to sweep it under the rug. I don't want to hope
It's
against
better
hope.
to do that than have middle of the night somebody have a branch in the roof.
Yeah,
Right.
and I don't want to be sued, but I don't want to have somebody get hurt. That's
Exactly.
the main thing.
Yeah.
I don't, and somebody, I'm rewiring your old apartment.
Mm-hmm.
The
It
wiring,
kind of started with ours, didn't it?
well, your apartment, the wiring was fine. I mean, it's, when I did the due diligence, it was not knob and tube and it was not aluminum. Those were problematic and they were consistent with the construction methodology that was used in the late 40s and early 50s. It was copper. It was nylon wrapped. It was a really revolutionary wiring for its day, but it was a precursor to Romex, which is what you need and what everybody does. That wasn't the only problem. The panel sizes, as you know, you didn't have enough plugs. You had to run some extension cords. And even though, for an apartment lifestyle, the plugs that are there, you can get by. It doesn't, as a landlord, protect me from somebody having a hairdryer and a this and a that and 5 things plugged into the same circuit and overheating a plug.
Right.
And
we were careful about that, but not everybody knows.
Well, as you know, so we had you had a fuse box instead of a circuit breaker in your stove, which was a 220 volt stove. Something happened, and I thought it was a bad stove. So I called the appliance guy, and he's like, no, man, this is something in the wall. So I'm like, okay, when they move out, and we dealt with it. The issue with the city of Montgomery, which is stupid, is you cannot pull a permit. You can't fix something like that without pulling a permit to do the entire building. And so the entire building means I have to rebuild, and I've done it since you've moved out. I spent $25,000 to rebuild the main service coming from the street to my electrical box on the building that the first power goes to before it gets subdivided into the apartment. So I'm doing all that. Yeah. And my wife is
where does
like,
that money come from? Like insurance or how do you?
They call it she money.
She money?
Do you know what she money is?
Don't think so.
It's money she don't know about. My wife. She being my wife.
So you have set aside
crazy.
just in case stuff.
Dude, I cash flow. And I just said, I'm not at all bashful about putting the cash flow back into the business. I'm not living off that. I never have. I've always, the money that I play with and that I live off of is the money that I've made through other businesses and non-real estate businesses, mainly my consulting, which is real estate related, but not my real estate business that I basically live and breathe every day.
Right.
So, but no, I had prepared for this. I knew when y'all were leaving that I was going to pull it off the market, and I'm full. I'm full with the way. I got people like, when are you going to be done with Cameron and Jazz's apartment because we want it.
Wow. Well, that's
so
good.
Anyway, but the main reason that my wife is like, okay, if you're your happy birthday, by the way, next week on the 27th, I'm going to be 68.
Wow.
And underneath this fat, there's still some badass, but not much.
Oh, you got crazy biceps
not
going
much
on.
left. It's because I do a lot of labor here on this job. And my she's like a taskmaster. But I did not. She's like, you're going to sell the property by your 70. She's made me promise that I'm going to be retired by 70. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to be working, but I'm not going to be doing this.
Right.
So, and, I think my tenants are kind of sensing it. So I also am like the movie The Accountant. Ben, whatever his name is.
The sniper guy?
Well, I mean, he was like an accountant, and he was like OCD or whatever. He had to finish everything.
Right.
I can't unfinish, so I want to finish the wiring anyway.
Yeah.
I did not want to sell the property to some other investor, maybe not as sophisticated or as experienced as I am, and hear before my dying days that the red brick had a fire because the wiring was the original wiring. I didn't want to hear that.
Right.
So I'm spending this money. And what that basically means is, I'm going to spend, to do the remaining units in this, I'm going to spend $250,000. But the value of the apartments is going to go up by $350,000 to $400,000. So I'm literally going to make money on the monies that I'm expending. So I've convinced my wife that I'm earning a nice return on her savings or her money. So, and if she watches, we'll be watching this podcast in a few months at home, and she'll be like, from across the room. So, but no, it's a partnership, and it will be with you guys, and that's maybe a whole other thing because I made the mistake of coming home to her and telling her that I was buying the 16 units, and we've been married, maybe a year, maybe even less than a year. And she's like, "What?" It should have been a team decision, and and 2 years later, we struggled. We struggled for the first year or two. I had a great job, but every penny of my salary, was going into the business, and she was a school teacher, so
she bitter about it.
What's that?
Was she bitter about it, or did she kind of try her best to support you? No, she wasn't bitter about it. She just didn't understand. We were so illiquid. It's like every month, at the end of the month, we'd have like $17.53 in our checkbook. And then I'd get a big paycheck from my real job. And then every weekend, she's like, what are we going to do this weekend? I'm like, well, I'm like painting apartments and sanding floors. You want to come help me? She's like, that's your deal, dude. That is your deal. I'm going all with my girlfriend. So, but no, it's sweat equity. And it was like, for me, I didn't resent it because it was a part of the plan all along. So, I've been really blessed. 2008 is like the worst thing that could ever happen in business. And, I got through it, and I'm stronger for it. And I'm not sure that, we're not headed for some really tough economic times ourselves. And, the R word is being kicked around every day now, and everybody's saying 2026, 2027. It's like we're going to have a 10% unemployment, not just because the economy's slowed down, but because AI is taking real people. The jobs that are being lost are not the $30 an hour jobs. These are the $150,000 a year analyst and, this or that. And why anybody would go to college now, I hate to say this, and that's my biggest worry, is what's going to happen to our secondary, post-secondary education in this country, because why in the hell do you want to spend $500,000 to $1 million for it's true, but you also don't want a ChatGPT trained surgeon. So as far as limiting your liability, I know what your main method was of doing that was creating multiple different LLCs and or
sub S's, and let's really quick talk about that. So there are differences between LLCs and subchapter S's. And for me, initially, I set up a couple of subchapter S's because I thought I might sell the stock. And you can have up to 100 shareholders with a sub S. And I have to file what's called an 1120S federal tax return. And that's more expensive. It's more involved. It's more complicated. And, you think about, well, how much does it cost you? Well, it's probably $500 more than the 1065 form that the IRS requires me to file for the LLC, which I can pretty much do those myself. I don't do the depreciation, but I pretty much do the returns myself. I can't do an 1120S. I have no way to, to even start on that. But an 1120S that cost you $500 a year in additional accounting fees, and that doesn't count my time in trying to prep and get the accountants ready for it. And you own the property for 40 years, do the math. It's a real number at the end of the day. So LLCs are better than sub S's, unless you think I'm going to sell stock at some point in time. I'm going to have 99 partners, but I'm going to be the president of the corporation, or I'm going to have 51% of the shares of the whatever. that was the only reason I did it. So the LLCs have been my primary choice for buying real estate properties. And they're cumbersome if you bring a whole bunch of partners in, but I have never wanted to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are two types of LLCs. There is a member-managed LLC and a manager-managed LLC. So within the protection framework of the LLC, I don't mind being named personally as the manager of an LLC. In fact, I prefer it. I require it when I bring outside family members or people into the business that I've created, because I don't ever want to get outvoted or, pushed to the side. So I have always opted for the manager-managed LLC format. And how I've done that, if I have a partner, and my brother and I have partnered up on some things. I do everything. I tell him how much the check I need, and it's like I do all the work. And but I'm using that as an example. So let's say we're 50-50 partners. Well, I can be the 1% managing partner and own 49% of the vote, or I can be the 1% manager and own 1% of the LLC and have control over the deal. That means the manager says what goes. And so that's always been important to me.
Gotcha.
If you're a member managed, and let's just say that I bring in 3 partners and we each take 25% of the deal. 3 people could outvote me.
Yeah,
because it's basically,
it's like
and you can help yourself with that. There's something called an operating agreement that goes with these LLCs, and in that operating agreement, you're afforded some flexibility to create some parameters. And in mine, and this is really important to do if you got outside partners. You got to have a buy-sell agreement, and basically I do it with what they call I have a Chinese option, which means if you're a pain in the ass and you offer to buy me out for $100, I can say, you know what? I think you're a pain in the ass, and I'm going to take your offer that you put in writing, and I'm going to flip it to you. That's a Chinese option, so I can force you out. And theoretically, it's supposed to prevent somebody from taking advantage of somebody else in the partnership. So that's one way.
Yeah.
And then we usually have provisions that if we can't get on agreement, then there's usually a built-in provision in the operating agreement to hire an appraiser to provide a valuation of whatever the asset is that's involved. And if the 2 parties don't agree to whatever valuation, it's, let's just say we've got a property that's worth $1 million, but we have $500,000 of debt we have to pay off or expenses. So the equity is $500,000, and it's 2 of us or 3 of us, and whatever. Let's just say 2 of us for the simplicity of math. Theoretically, your value would be $250,000, and my value would be $250,000. But if an appraiser says that it's worth $400,000, and you're like, hell no, I'm not going to sell it for 50% of $400,000. It's worth 50% of $500,000. Then the operating agreement that I structure usually has the provision for another appraiser to be brought in. And they have to be CCIM level or something. That doesn't mean anything to you. They have to have certain certification requirements to do that. But then if those 2 disagree, my documents require a third to come in. You take an average of the 3. So, and there's no way to litigate beyond that. It's in the operating agreement. They signed on it, and it's never been an issue for me. I've never been sued for it. I've had to point it out to some people that, had some unrealistic expectations when, it was not a good time to sell or whatever. But, one guy was just needing the money to, he was older than me and his wife was younger than, if I had a daughter, it'd be younger than my daughter. So, he was trying to impress somebody, I think. Anyway.
So your other main way of limiting liability besides, LLCs and for all your properties
best practices.
Right. It's putting an effort into your upkeep, right?
Well, that's a part of it, but it's like get an LLC, have an operating agreement that provides further protection, have a operational plan that is proactive instead of reactive. And if you see a potential liability, if I was up on a ladder on the other side of that door and I was pulling screws out with a hammer, and I left the hammer up there, and I knew you guys were going to go through that door, and I left the hammer up there, that's gross negligence. Right. I mean, I should be sued for something like that. But, if the hammer was down on the ground and you stepped on it and it flipped up and broke your shin, that's just, maybe that's negligence, maybe it's not. But I'd defend that and I'd probably win. The first one, I shouldn't win. I should lose.
Right.
I should have to pay for whatever knots, or stitches on your head. So think about that in every case. And in my case, we're in a canopy neighborhood. We got beautiful hardwoods, mostly oak trees. And just the other day, I saw a big limb that was like, I don't know if it had been wind damaged or whatever, but it was like hanging. And, my wife is, at 68, she doesn't want me on ladders. And, I kind of like sort of respect that. But so I'm up on my ladder that she didn't know I was on.
I won't tell her.
So I got a 14-foot extension ladder, and I'm like leaning it against the tree limb that I'm trying to cut with a chainsaw. I mean, what could go wrong? I mean, over my head, with no eye guards on. So anyway, because I take it so serious, I didn't want somebody to walk under that tree limb, and they call them widowmakers for a reason. So that is, another thing. And then the final thing, we joked about that. It's called an indemnification and hold harmless that I had you sign before we crawled under where I had the hockey mask on. Right. And that wasn't to be funny. That was literally because I knew I was going to have spider webs, and I didn't want it to get all in my face. And you were making me lead the way, which meant you had to look at my butt the whole way we were crawling through there. But
I tried not to.
So that was a fun way to make a point in this. I knew we were going to do this interview. And so whenever I hire an individual to do work, and I pick up people all the time to do painting and cleaning and maintenance and stuff, I don't want, and I have had, I actually did have somebody file a workers' comp claim on me when they were an independent contractor 20 years ago. And, I hired an investigator, and we filmed him climbing up in a tree stand in one of the national, what do you call the forest, like, where people can hunt. What do you call them? The national forest. You could get a hunting license. And anyway, so we shot that guy out of the saddle pretty quick. His attorney was not happy when in discovery, we presented the video footage of him climbing up into the tree stand when he supposedly hurt his back doing something for me.
Oh, wow.
So I'd get all of my independent contractors to sign what is called an indemnification and hold harmless. And you need both of those aspects of it. Just talk to an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving you any advice that you should follow other than talk to your attorney about what you need. But it's what I've used. And so if nothing more, if it's so one-sided, the attorneys might call it an adhesion contract. That's something to look up. But it goes both ways. They have certain responsibilities. I have certain responsibilities. If I put him in a safe environment, and we're sitting in a safe environment right now, but a plane could crash and crash through this ceiling, and that's not, you shouldn't sue me for that. You should sue Delta because the pilot was drunk or whatever, and 333s, call this number, and, it's better than a headache. But so the indemnification and hold harmless puts the independent contractor on notice that if they see anything that they're not safe with, they have to tell me.
Right.
I'm not perfect. My job sites are not perfect. I don't know that there's rotten wood where they're climbing up on a ladder and their ladder is resting against rotten wood until I get up on the ladder. I don't have 20/20 vision anymore. So it's not enough for you to climb up there and the ladder to fall and you fall off a ladder because the wood was rotten and it didn't support the ladder and sue me for it. Yeah, you can, but you may or may not win. But if you have the obligation to tell me about it and then you don't tell me about it and you said in this document that you're going to disclose anything that you deem to be unsafe or that makes you uncomfortable. I want to know that. Trust me, I want to know that beforehand. So it's a combination of a special purpose entity. LLCs is what I would recommend to you. They're really the most flexible and they require the least amount of paperwork from a tax accounting standpoint. Insurance, you got to have insurance and a minimum, of a $1 million, $2 million. Liability coverage. And once you get multiple properties, you might want to consider an umbrella. Like I said, it's a $1 million, $2 million is going to cost you a few $100 a year. It's just not, $800 or $900 a year.
It's worth it.
Right.
A $2 million liability umbrella is going to cost you maybe $2,000 or $3,000. So it's the best. In other words, it's more expensive than the million, but it's not pro rata more expensive. It's the best bargain you can get for insurance. And so that's helpful to have. And then having an operating agreement that prevents some type of being sued internally because of some business transaction or fallout. They happen all the time. And my attitude has been fish, fraternity brothers living on your sofa, and partners stink after 3 days or 3 years. Partners after 3 years, I don't need them. I don't want them. I love being in business with my family, but as far as, having an investor, I'd rather not buy a property or not buy 3 properties, just buy one and own it myself, than have 2 partners that allow me to buy 3 properties. It's not about scale for me. It's about, do I have a good portfolio?
Right.
So, and then the last and not the least is which is just have a good operational plan. I call it best practices, and make sure that you're proactive in mitigating any potential liability, and just take your position seriously. You guys are going to be landlords.
Yeah.
I mean, you're stewards of these people's health and welfare. It's a very I lay awake at night worrying about it, and I'm not bragging about it. It's just the way that I'm wired, and I'm not saying that all landlords don't do that, but I know there's some that don't.
Right. They don't care.
Well, if you let something bad happen, it's already too late. You got to be proactive, right?
That's absolutely true. And, I'm going to end this, unless you have other questions, I'm going to end this with a real quick story about one of the best days of my life, and it involves somebody almost dying in my properties. Oh. So this was just 2 years ago, and it's somebody that's narrating an audiobook for us right now. And he was in an upstairs apartment, and he was in trouble. And he's stubborn. He'll probably be watching this at some point in time. And so the neighbor downstairs called me. It's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And the fact that they called me at 2 or 3 was a blessing, and just I'm not one of these landlords that's not going to respond to my cell phone ringing or vibrating at 3 in the morning. I might not hear it. My wife might have to say, get your ass up, answer your phone, which I think she did that night.
Yeah.
But, so this tenant, the downstairs tenant, said, I think something's going on. I'm hearing like a bunch of knocking from the guy upstairs, and I think he might be in trouble. I'm hearing some wailing or something or other also. So I got up and I was over there in like 5 minutes, and, just go up there, and he's like, man, there's just blood everywhere. He's throwing up blood, and it's awful. I mean, it's like, what the hell? So I'm like dialing 911. He's like, no, dude, don't do that. And he's a friend of mine. I mean, he's a tenant, but he's a friend of mine, and he's about my age. He's like, don't do that. I got this. I got an ulcer. And I'm looking down, and it's like coagulated black blood.
Oh.
I mean, it just didn't even look
the
like
bad kind.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's like it'd been in his system for a while. I'm like, dude, he's like, don't call 911. Well, I didn't cancel the call. I'd already called him. I didn't cancel the call, and they got there. And the guy's, and he's like, I'm feeling better. I'm going to go back to bed. I'll go to see my doctor. I want to go to my primary care provider in the morning. I'm good. And so I asked the paramedic that was there, I'm like, can we make him go? I mean, this is obviously a 911 call. Can we make him go? He's like, I've talked to him. He's in sound mind. And I know I can't. So anyway, I said, dude, are you sure? He's like, yeah, I'm fine, man. I feel so. I had maybe just a shred of hope that he could make it to 7 a.m. This is 3 in the morning or whatever. I no more than get home, and the call comes back again from the tenant below.
Yep.
And she's like, I'm so worried. I don't know what's going on. So I beat a trail back over there, and I'm like, I'm calling 911. I don't care what you say, dude. And he was like, he'd fallen again, and there was more blood. It was just blood. It looked like a murder scene.
Yeah, we were there that night. We didn't hear anything, but I mean, I remember when that happened.
Are you sure? I thought it was like, y'all have been with me. Was it? Okay.
It was pretty, it
might have been pretty quick right after you guys got here, though, because I think it was in the fall.
We're pretty deep sleepers, so it could have been we just
didn't wake up.
And so, anyway, so he got there, and he was having like some kind of something ruptured. Like, it was like a major, he's going to bleed out, basically. And so, and I'm not patting myself on the back for that. It's the fact that I have caring tenants that live in this community that look out for one another. I wouldn't trade that for anything. And so I don't want to create a liability, when there's a community that values living in my properties as much as they obviously do. And the guy's fine. And he's like, dude, if it wasn't for you being level-headed and like overriding my bullheadedness, I'd be dead. He says, I'm going to go see my grandkids this week, and like, man, it just like, I teared up. I mean, it's like, that to me, if I had to pick one day that was like the best day of my real estate investing career, and it was actually a night, it was that night.
Yeah.
So take your role as a landlord very seriously. It is a very responsible position to take, and landlords are not very well thought of. I mean, there's a bunch of maggot ones that like have cameras and film and do all this
people
stupid
don't
stuff.
like landlords.
No, it's and even worse than the fact that people don't like them is the press would love to have a story about, a landlord that's a bad,
probably take anything.
Bad actor.
Yeah.
So, but don't do it because you don't want to be sued, and don't do it because you don't want to get negative publicity. Do it because you genuinely care for the people that are living in your apartments, and you'll be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I can't wait to hear what y'all want to buy.
Yeah, we still got to
We can't wait to decide.
It's why, it's what, and when, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank y'all.